Back in the old days, everybody in the neighborhood knew about the lady who loved cats. I won't say her name or where she lived, but you can picture the type of person I mean. She was a middle child who grew up without much company and never really settled down. As time went by, her hair turned gray, and more cats found their way into her home. You can imagine what her house looked like too. It only got a good cleaning once a year, and the rest of the time, it was ruled by a bunch of bossy felines. As time passed, people started to wonder what happened to the cat lady, but nobody seemed to know, or if they did, they didn't want to talk about it. And I suppose that's part of why I'm telling this story now. Maybe I'm not thinking straight anymore. Years ago, almost a whole generation back, I was patrolling the neighborhood alone in my police car. It was always a quiet area, and I was thankful for that during my time on the force. I never had to use my gun, and I was grateful for that too. But when it comes to the cat lady, I have to tell you about the time I came closest to pulling the trigger. People hadn't seen her for a while, only her cats were visible. They were split into two groups, seeming a bit lost without her. Some were scratching at her door, probably seeking some relief from the summer heat. The others were peering out from the windows, mewing at anyone who stopped by. It was probably those cats that made the neighbors uneasy, and they were the reason I got the call for the wellness check. Do you understand now? I have a special role in telling this story because I was the one who found her. Only a few people witnessed what truly occurred that day. The rest of them, still working hard in their jobs, I reckon, are probably less talkative than I am now in my older years. It seems their careers as paramedics lasted longer than my time as a police officer. Anyway, it all started like any other routine visit. I knocked on the door and called out, but as expected, there was no response. I knew I needed medical help, and the answer to the most important question was already in the air. What happened here? With a tentative touch, I tested if the door was unlocked. It swung open easily, and I had to step carefully to avoid the stream of cats coming in and out of the entryway. It seemed like the two groups were switching sides. Each group probably thought the other had it better, but they hadn't realized yet that in this situation, everyone was losing out. I made sure to call animal control before stepping inside the house. In my mind, I pictured finding the cat lady in her bed. I imagined she might be a bit decomposed after a few days, but I hoped she'd still be recognizable. As I entered, I tried not to gag on the strong smell that hit my nose like a punch. My eyes watered, and I felt queasy. I called out once more, just in case she was able to respond. When I heard a noise that sounded heavier than a cat, I froze. "Hello?" I called out again, trying to announce my presence. Another thud echoed from somewhere deep in the house. It startled me, and I realized I might have misjudged the situation. Without thinking, I hurried forward, forgetting to call for additional help. At that moment, danger was the furthest thing from my mind. I pushed my way through the door, gently moving aside some of the cats that were darting around anxiously. Eventually, I reached what I figured was the bedroom door. The shuffling noises seemed to be coming from behind it, accompanied by the sound of someone groaning. Once again, the door handle turned easily. This time, though, as I twisted it, I made sure to keep the door firmly shut. If it was the cat lady on the other side, why hadn't she let herself out? And if it wasn't her, who or what was behind the door? Could it be an intruder? I unhooked the safety strap from my gun holster, but didn't draw the weapon just yet. With caution, I slowly pushed the door open, allowing it to reveal the mystery that lay beyond. The smell told me the cat lady had been there for more than just a few days. It seemed like she had been alone for a week, or maybe even longer. I won't go into all the details now. They're not something you'd want to hear about. Trust me, even I didn't want to see what I saw. My lunch dropped from my hands and landed on the floor with a thud. The cats hurried over to investigate, but I didn't have the time or energy to shoo them away. I had to focus on understanding why and how the cat lady was standing there in front of me. She moved strangely, almost like a robot with jerky motions, until finally we were face to face. I heard the paramedics entering through the front door, rushing towards me. I don't remember pulling my gun from its holster, but suddenly it was in my hands. I aimed it at her, at the figure that looked human but moved so unnaturally. It tried to step closer to me, lifting its leg awkwardly, but stumbled and almost fell. As the woman's figure shifted, the paramedics hurried over to me. They were ready to start asking questions and giving orders, thinking they could take charge of the situation. But they weren't prepared for whatever she was. Suddenly, she collapsed. One of her knees buckled and she fell forward onto the hard floor with a loud thud. It sounded like a bag of tomatoes hitting the ground, bursting open. I stumbled backward out of the house as the paramedics continued inside. They were stronger and more composed than me. Maybe that's why they're not the ones telling this story. Perhaps they found their own explanations for what happened. But I didn't leave right away. I stayed on that porch, looking down at the gun in my shaky hands. I didn't understand what she had turned into or how it had happened. All I knew was that I almost made a big mistake, and that weighed heavily on me. You can ask anyone. I was good at my job. I really was. But everything changed after that day with her. I don't usually buy into all the spooky stuff, and you can show me all the evidence and theories you want, but I don't get scared easily. Never have. And most of the time, I still don't. But I've got to be honest, there's this one thing that happened to me that I just can't explain. It's like I've seen something really strange, and I can't figure out what it was. Maybe that makes me sound like I'm not true to what I say. Maybe it sounds like I'm not being honest. All I can do is tell you what happened and let you make up your own mind about it. So, I often go to Colorado. My family has a cozy apartment there. We go on a family trip to the mountain base every year or so. But when we're not there, we rent it out to others. Airbnb has made it easy for us to do that. Back in the day, we used to use the apartment for family getaways. We'd all go together and hit the slopes when the weather was good. But as we all got older and started doing our own thing, we started visiting the place at different times. It became a little hideout for each of us. Whenever life got too crazy, we could escape to Colorado and relax. A few years back, I decided to go hiking all by myself, even though it was snowy. This wasn't unusual for me. I knew the trails pretty well, although I didn't feel like a tourist anymore. The sky was covered in clouds, making it feel lonelier, but I didn't mind. I liked having the mountain to myself. There weren't many people around. It got colder and grayer as I climbed higher, which wasn't what most folks wanted. I was just looking for some peace and quiet. I thought the fresh air might help clear my head. Looking back, that was a silly idea, and I had no clue what I was about to find. As I neared the top, I slipped and sprained my ankle. It was a rookie mistake, but accidents happen. It wasn't so bad that I couldn't move, but I had to sit in the snow for a while to rest. I told myself I'd rest for 20 minutes, then head back down. Standing on the slope of the mountain, I looked down at the town below. From there, I could spot the building where my apartment was. My car looked tiny in the parking lot. I must have climbed pretty high. Even though my ankle was hurting, I took a deep breath and felt a bit better. Then, something thudded onto the ground next to me, sinking into the snow and leaving a small dent before disappearing under the powder. What was that? Before I could turn around, another white clump crashed down nearby and vanished just like the first one. Was it a snowball? My siblings and I used to play pranks like this on each other, and I found myself chuckling as I turned around, half expecting to see a family or a kid playing tricks on me. But there was nobody there. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing softly in the snowy silence. But there was no reply. Instead, another icy ball whizzed towards me, so I had to duck quickly to avoid it. I landed on the ground with a thud, snow filling my mouth as I gasped for breath and tried to sit up. When I managed to look up, I saw a figure up the mountain much farther than I expected. It must have been about 60 yards away. It didn't make sense. The gray shape just stood there. Unless it was a football player wearing snow camouflage, this person seemed totally out of place. I told whoever it was to stop throwing things and tried to stand up once more, but they weren't throwing anymore. Now they were coming towards me, running fast. What I thought was gray clothing swayed with each step, like hair. It looked like fur covering them from head to toe, and that's exactly what it was. As they got closer, the dim light revealed their face. They were angry, with curled lips, sharp teeth showing, and flared nostrils. Their brow looked square and tense. It wasn't a person. It moved like one but seemed more primitive, taller and heavier. I turned and ran as fast as I could. I stumbled, scrambled, and kept running, ignoring the pain in my ankle. I just wanted to get away from that thing, even if it meant tumbling head over heels down the mountain. I knew whatever it was chasing me, wanting me off the mountain. I didn't even want to think about what would happen if it caught me. How far could it throw me, I wondered. Then I heard someone shouting, so I turned and saw two snowboarders on a nearby ridge. I stumbled towards them, practically falling into their arms. They asked what was wrong, and I pointed towards where I had seen the creature, but it had vanished into the snow or maybe even turned back. The snowboarders moved forward to investigate, thinking I was exaggerating. But I pulled them back, fear in my eyes. They must have seen how serious I was because they stopped looking for the creature. The snowboarders helped me get back to safety, and I reported what happened and went back to my apartment. I had a hot bowl of soup and some whiskey to try and forget about the scary encounter. I still don't believe in monsters, but maybe that's because I still don't know what I saw. How can I believe in something if I don't even know what it is? Maybe it was just a strange thing in the Colorado snow. But then again, maybe it wasn't. Once I went on a big adventure down in Scape Ore Swamp, which is in South Carolina. I didn't plan it. I just felt like I needed to get outside and see some nature. So I jumped in the car and headed there. This swamp is famous for being mysterious and wild. People told me stories about it, but I wanted to see it with my own eyes. Walking there alone, I felt like I was in my own world, but then something strange happened. Suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. As I walked deeper into the swamp, I started feeling like someone or something was with me. You know that weird feeling when you think someone's looking at you? That's what I felt. The swamp was so quiet except for the sound of my own footsteps. It was like the swamp had its own secret world, and it was letting me know that it was in charge. I tried to ignore it and keep walking, but then something strange happened. Everything went silent. No crickets chirping, no frogs croaking, just silence. It felt like they all knew something I didn't. So I stopped too, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for... I didn't even know what. It seemed like the swamp was expecting something, and it wasn't me. Then things got really strange. I heard this noise, like something big moving in the mud, and I'm not easily scared. But let me tell you, I was terrified. And then I saw him, the lizard man. I'm not joking. It was like every story I'd ever heard about him was happening right in front of me. This creature was huge, towering over me like something out of a dinosaur book. His scales were a dark green, not just one color, but lots of different shades, like the leaves of the trees around us. His scales overlapped on his muscles, which moved silently as he walked, like armor on a giant tank. The way they reflected the light made them shimmer with a shiny, almost rainbow-like quality, shining on the twisted roots below him. And his eyes, they were intense, piercing, two glowing orbs in a face that looked sharp and dangerous. In movies, when something really strange appears, it's usually all made up with computer stuff. But this was totally different. This was real. He was real, and the energy around him was intense, like something strong and wild. He seemed like a king, ruling over everything in the night. His hands were big and had sharp claws, like a mix between a person's and an animal's. Every time he breathed, it felt like he was making a big statement, especially in the cold air of the swamp. He wasn't just standing there. He was like a giant statue made of muscle, just being there in the swamp. I knew I should have run away, but I was frozen, so we just stared at each other until I finally got the courage to speak. "Who are you?" I asked, even though I knew he wouldn't answer. He just kept looking at me, like he was trying to decide if I was worth bothering with. So I started to walk backward really slowly, but every step I took, he took one toward me. It felt like the swamp was closing in on me, like I was stuck in a trap. I was sure this was the end for me, like it was my last day alive. As I stumbled and fell flat on my back, I thought, this is definitely it for me. But the creature didn't move. He just watched. So when the clouds moved and the moonlight shone again, I didn't waste a moment. I ran like my life depended on it, because it probably did. That swamp played tricks on me, making the path seem endless. And the scariest part? He was still following me. I was in full survival mode, dodging branches, leaping over roots, doing whatever I could to get away. But when I finally burst into a clearing, the creature stopped at the edge, like he couldn't step into the open. It was like he didn't want to be fully seen. Taking a moment to catch my breath, I looked back at him. In the moonlight, he looked almost majestic. But that didn't change the icy fear in my chest. So I ran out of that swamp as fast as my legs could carry me and didn't stop until I reached the safety of solid ground. The next day, I went over to my friend's house because he was having a big bonfire. I started telling everyone about the lizard man I saw. I tried to act cool and not show how scared I was, but the more I talked, the wider their eyes got. I told them every single detail, from the shiny scales in the moonlight to the glowing eyes. They were hanging on my every word, half not believing it, but also half wanting to believe it was true. I was waving my arms around, getting louder and louder as I told the story. They were all listening, some looking scared and others just really interested. Around the fire, there was this mix of excitement and fear as they imagined the creature from my story actually being out there in the swamp. Here's the crazy part. Some of them wanted to go find him, to try and catch him or something. Can you believe that? But I couldn't do it. He let me go, so instead I led them on a wild chase in the opposite direction of where I saw him. I figured that was fair, but I still get shivers when I think about it. It just goes to show there are some things out there that we're just not meant to mess with. My father owns a ranch in Colorado where he raises cattle. Although I don't work alongside him anymore, I still make sure to visit him every so often. His ranch is situated in a remote area amidst the San Juan Mountains, making it quite a challenge to reach, especially during the winter months. These days I have a job as a financial analyst in Austin, and surprisingly, much of my work revolves around the agricultural sector, which makes sense considering my background. I've never been one to let my imagination run wild, which actually suits my line of work quite well. Financial analysis is all about crunching numbers, making logical decisions, and maximizing profits. My dad shares a similar mindset. He's not one for fanciful thinking either. Living in such an isolated place, it's reassuring to have a practical approach to things. When you're hours away from any form of immediate help, it's better to rely on a steady mind rather than conjure up improbable scenarios. The reason I find this story believable is because my dad isn't the imaginative type. He's never been one to make up tales, not even for bedtime or around the campfire. If he shares a story, it's usually from a book or something a friend told him. He's not the type to invent anything new or original. But this story he told me was different. It was fresh, unique, strange, and a little scary. Hearing it from him was quite surprising, and he seemed genuinely convinced when he shared it, his eyes showing no signs of deceit. He called me a few weeks back and recounted this tale, and it's been on my mind ever since. I've been wondering if anyone else has witnessed or experienced something similar. That's why I'm sharing it now. Maybe someone out there has encountered something like it. According to my dad, it all had to do with the behavior of his cattle. He owns a large herd spread across several pastures and barns, and it's like a vast cattle kingdom. With 50 years of experience, he knows their behavior inside and out, what's normal and what's not. From what he described, it's pretty clear that the behavior of these cattle was unusual. Even if you weren't an expert in cow behavior for 50 years, you'd notice something was off. According to my dad, this went on for several days. It all started in the morning when he went out to begin his daily chores. Right away, he could tell that something wasn't right. Every single cow was facing north. It wasn't like they were moving in that direction. They were just standing there, all pointing the same way, and their bodies were aligned in perfect rows, like soldiers standing at attention. Dad walked among them, trying to make sense of it all. He said they seemed perfectly healthy and calm, not showing any signs of distress. They were just fixated on whatever lay to the north, and as the day went on, some of them snapped out of it and went back to their normal behavior. But others remained, still staring northward, as if they couldn't break free from whatever held their attention. My dad speculated that maybe the cows sensed a storm on the horizon because animals have a knack for picking up on those things and reacting to them. He couldn't be certain, but he tried not to dwell on it too much. The following morning was a repeat of the strange scene. Dad rose early, only to find all the cattle facing north once again. Even the ones that had reverted to their normal behavior were back to staring in the same direction. This peculiar pattern persisted for 6 consecutive days, and each morning the cows were all aligned northward. Throughout the day, most of them returned to their usual selves, but come the next morning, they were all facing the same way again. On the 7th day, my father said things took a turn for the truly bizarre. That's when something unexpected appeared in the pasture. When my father ventured out after the 7th night, he stumbled upon a startling sight. There in the field was a massive rectangle. Strangely, there were no markings on the grass, no lines, burn marks, or ditches, yet the cows were steering clear of it. They left a gaping rectangle-shaped hole in their midst, with perfect right angles and straight lines. It resembled a crop circle, but right in the midst of a herd of cows, and what made it even more puzzling was its shape. If it had been a circle or an oval, perhaps it would have seemed less baffling, but cows don't understand rectangles, and they certainly don't know how to form right angles. My dad is convinced that there's something unnatural behind this odd cow behavior. He believes they sensed something we couldn't. Perhaps something visited his pasture, instilling fear in the cows and causing them to avoid that rectangular patch of the field. My dad also believes that the cows sensed something coming, like a storm brewing in the air. That's why they stood facing north for so many days. They were anticipating it. Dad checked, and all the cattle were present and accounted for. None had gone missing. After a day or two, the rectangle in the field broke apart and filled back in. It seemed like whatever invisible visitor had caused it. The cows weren't affected by it. As I mentioned earlier, my dad isn't one for imagination. That's why I trust him, and I believe he truly witnessed his cows behaving strangely and couldn't find an explanation. Neither he nor I can figure out what might have caused it. Imagine you're in a place far away from big cities, surrounded by vast desert. There's a town called Harmony Hills, nestled right at the edge of the sandy dunes. Now, Harmony Hills isn't on any map, but if you ask around, someone will surely point you in the right direction. One day I was feeling a bit lost in my own thoughts. Things just didn't seem to click, you know? Then, a friend mentioned something called a Harmony Retreat. It's a place where people go to reconnect with themselves, they said. I thought, why not give it a shot? So off I went to Harmony Retreat. The place was like a cozy village, with little cabins all around a central area, and there was a big fire pit, some benches, and this old weathered statue right in the middle. It looked like some kind of animal, although I couldn't quite figure out which one. The first few days were pretty normal. We did some meditation, shared stories, and wandered around the peaceful surroundings. But then, on the 3rd night, things got interesting. The air was chilly, and the sky was a deep blue blanket with stars twinkling like tiny diamonds. I couldn't sleep, so I decided to take a walk, and as I strolled, I noticed something strange about the statue. It seemed like it had moved. I know it sounds crazy, but hear me out. It was facing a different direction than before. Curiosity got the best of me, and I went to investigate. As I got closer, it felt like the air got colder and everything became super quiet. Suddenly, right before my eyes, something appeared. It was tall, really tall, with skin that seemed to soak up all the light around it, and its eyes were like liquid gold, shiny and mesmerizing. I was scared, but also kind of in awe. We just stood there staring at each other without saying a word. Well, not out loud anyway. It was like it could talk to me without speaking, like magic. I tried to talk back, but my voice wouldn't come out. It felt like this creature could see right through me, like it knew all my secrets without me saying a thing. After what felt like forever, it disappeared, leaving me feeling all shaken up. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I felt like everyone could see something was up with me, even though I couldn't explain what had happened. Night fell again, and I found myself drawn back to the statue. I sat there for hours, waiting, and sure enough, the creature came back. This time, I found my voice and asked it all sorts of questions. Turns out it was there to help me see things about myself that I hadn't noticed before. It was like a mirror, reflecting back all the good and not so good parts of me. When morning came, it was gone, but I left the retreat feeling different, changed somehow. I didn't have all the answers, but I felt like I was on the right path. So now, when I look up at the stars at night, I remember that experience. It's like a reminder to keep growing and learning, even when things seem a bit scary or strange.